3. Stop me if you've heard this one before. I quite liked Resident Evil 5 at launch. Sure, it didn't scare me or was even tense, but I played it with my sister and it was a lot of fun in co-op. It's a good game, but not a good Resident Evil game. I have a soft spot for it. There's quite a good chance that I just reached into the throats of some of you and ripped those words out. It's how I've described Resident Evil 5 for over a decade, with rose-tinted memories of boulder punching. I have changed my mind about Resident Evil 5. In the closing minutes of the game, Chris Redfield says,
"More and more I find myself wondering if it's all worth fighting for. For a future without fear? Yeah, it's worth it."
A future without fear is the goal here. A world free of the horrors that come from bioweaponry, terrorists, cackling villains, and deranged scientists. It's hopeful, it's sincere, and it characterizes Resident Evil as a series back in 2009. After Resident Evil 4, fans of the franchise were faced with a future without fear. Resident Evil 5 opened Pandora's box, and what burst out of it was a future where horror wasn't the focus, but an action-packed fight against bioterrorism. Backtracking was dead. Now you followed a linear path from set piece to set piece. Puzzles were minimal. You progressed by shooting. Isolation wasn't a tonal pillar. Now you were playing co-op. Brooding tension had all but evaporated. Now you were mowing down mobs with an AK-47. And if you were to check in with game outlets in 2009, the response to that was positive. An 83 on Metacritic, a 9 out of 10 from IGN, a 9.5 from Game Informer, a 10 out of 10 by Giant Bomb. Explain yourselves, Giant Bomb.
I played it start to finish in 3 sittings. I've played it extensively in other capacities while working on this review, and still can't wait to go back and play through it again cooperatively on higher difficulties to open up more of its goodies. If that's not the definition of a fine action game, I don't know what is.
I do have a soft spot for Resident Evil 5, but it frustrates rather than frights. Giant Bomb might call it an action game, but that's not how it was pitched, how it was marketed, or frankly, how it was designed. Its greatest problem is that it doesn't know what it wants to be. People slap the term action horror on it to try and justify its lack of spooks, but it suffers as both an action game and a horror game to the point that it's regularly bland. Its mechanical core still tries to breed horror, but it leaps into set pieces that spoil it. Its best bits are when it copy-pastes from Resident Evil 4, something that happens a lot, and its worst bits are when it tries to break free of those constraints. Its greatest success is in how it characterizes Albert Wesker, earnestly brings a 13-year-old story full circle, and packages some legitimately spooky DLC that ought to have been the main game. A future without fear might have been Chris's goal, but it shouldn't have been Resident Evil's. And whether on purpose or by accident, it pushed Resi into a genre it wasn't equipped to handle and had no business being in the first place. So, grab your shades and your machine gun. This is a commentary and critique of Resident Evil 5. Resident Evil 5 is like a vegan zombie. The vegan zombie has a desire for flesh and meat locked into its very DNA. It has the appearance of a rotting husk slouching towards its prey with one goal: to chomp on your skull. But underneath its moulding brain, it wants to push past its fleeing victims to scoop up a salad. Resi 5 has a desire to scare its player, to give you chills, thrills, a creeping unease, and a sense of panic. It slathers itself in blood and guts and claims it wants to terrify you, but it shoves horror fans aside in favor of a desert military shooter. Both are oxymorons, impossible, confused about what they're supposed to be.
A new era of bioterrorism descended upon vulnerable countries, shifting the balance of power throughout the region.
Chris Redfield drives toward the Kajuju Autonomous Zone. The area is destabilized. Rumor has it that bioweapons have caused the local government to fall, and now it's a free-for-all. Ignoring the sheer size of him, the years haven't been kind. Off-screen, he's taken the fight to Umbrella with Jill Valentine and Barry Burton, and following their collapse, he helped found the Bioterrorism Security Assessment Alliance, the BSAA. What the BSAA does as an organization is contextualize Resident Evil's view on the war on terror and lean into shifting perceptions on America's response to 9/11. We talked before about how Resident Evil 4 masterfully exploited the xenophobia that shook the globe after the towers fell. The other were the bad guys. Leon was the all-American hero taking down a foreign threat while quipping. Chris doesn't quip. He grumbles, he frowns, he keeps his cool by embracing mission speak. It's a nice reflection of how Resident Evil 1 opened, and ultimately solidifies him as a bitter, detached, torn man. This is something that would become a series constant from this point on. One thing that Resident Evil 5 has over its predecessor is the introduction of an explicit theme, a character path for our main hero. Leon eventually got that in Resident Evil 4 Remake, but the 2005 version just implied his survivor's guilt, and even then, it was a thin implication. When Sheva references that she'll be his new partner, it triggers something in Chris, and we flash to a disturbing image for longtime fans. Jill Valentine's grave. He knows others will soon follow. Notably, Chris acknowledges that he likely won't be welcome in Africa because he's from the US. He later tells Sheva that America has its own dark side. I'm just a realist. It's a capitalist society. Not everyone is cut out for that kind of constant pressure. Sure, there are opportunities to be had, but at what price? But yeah, keep politics out of Resident Evil, right? He throws himself into work because he doesn't like being in the States. That's partly to distract from what he's experienced, duty-bound to forever find and destroy bioweapons. But he acknowledges the role the US government played in the political climate that Resident Evil finds itself in 2009. Umbrella was selling bioweapons to the military. The White House nuked a Midwestern town. The BSAA operates outside of American jurisdiction. It's headquartered in the UK. It takes its orders from the United Nations Security Council. The majority of Resident Evil 5's story leans on the African contingent of the organization, bringing in Sheva Alomar.
Welcome to Africa. My name is Sheva Alomar.
Chris Redfield.
Your reputation precedes you, Mr. Redfield. It's an honor.
Now, introducing Sheva Ass first might seem a little lewd, but the game's actually foreshadowing the quality of her partner AI. We're not isolated like Leon was in Spain, Stars were in the Spencer Mansion, or Claire was on Rockfort Island. Before gameplay is handed over, we see the people of Kajuju are going about their business, chatting, attending a market, carrying water home. We see the area populated with everyday chores before everything goes to hell. Heck, even later when Chris approaches the gate to the autonomous zone, we see guards armed with AK-47s. Not only is there a local, unbrainwashed population, but there are armed forces who might be able to help out later. We have started surrounded by hundreds of potential allies, so the tension we felt in other titles simply isn't here. And that weakens the slow, effective trod through the zone before the bubble bursts. The locals mind their own business until we pass, suddenly stopping what they're doing and turning their attention to just stare. A small cluster bluntly beat the crap out of something alive and squirming in a woven sack. They pause when we're near. But it's all undermined by a pilot, Kirk, chipping away in our ear, providing coordinates for us to follow, and explicitly reassuring Chris and the player that not only is he just a hop skip away, but so is the rest of the BSAA. Rendezvous, Ordnance, Alpha Team, Bravo Team, all terminology that never retreats from the experience, and this is the first real moment that Resident Evil 5's pretense of strong, organic horror is replaced with little military shooterisms. Where Resi 1 took its action aesthetic and ripped it apart in the opening seconds, Resi 5 sews it together and stitches around the spooks. When Chris and Sheva are suddenly alone in a once populated space, it should be terrifying. It really should be the moment that the game stops pretending to be an action-packed fighter fest and instead falls into the foreboding tension that made Resident Evil 4 so engaging. An air raid siren signals danger, someone gives orders in Swahili over the radio. Suddenly, everyone is gone. But because we know there's a busy, armed populace just 30 feet behind us, because Kirk and Alpha Team are just over the ridge, and worst of all, because we saw this scene in Resident Evil 4 already, it doesn't work. It's tonally confusing. It's a vegan zombie.
Maybe because of the new government, the people around here are a little on edge. You should do what you came here to do and go home.
Yeah, they really roll out the red carpet for us Americans.
Reynard Fisher, our guide, gives us the plot. A man named Ricardo Irving has been selling bioweapons on the black market and something insidious is brewing in Kijuju. There are rumors of something called Ouroboros, a doomsday project. Irving should know more. Reynard is just one of a few parallels Resident Evil 5 has with Resident Evil 4. Just like the police officers at the start of Leon's adventure, he's our guide. And also, just like those police officers, he's executed just before a high-stakes ambush in an open area where we handle waves of bad guys, one of which is specifically dangerous as a timer ticks down. The parallels are such a constant that at times, it feels like Capcom are slowly ticking off a checklist. Our main character is a stranger in a strange land. It opens with music indigenous to the setting. A standoff with a humanoid enemy who seems distinctly not zombified in an enclosed space, despite the dev team originally considering zombies for our enemy faction. Chainsaw-wielding maniacs. El Gigante, shooting explosives in a minecart. Shooting a truck as it barrels towards us. Numerous sequences reminiscent of Resi 4's cabin where we need to defend a spot while waves of monsters attack. An underground temple built around a bioweapon. Skulls lit by candlelight. Trip mines. Vipers jump out of barrels and crates for God's sake. Oh come on Monty, aren't you being a little pedantic? Sure, maybe. But not really. I am making the case that Resident Evil 5 is boring and uninspired. It doesn't just mimic parts of Resident Evil 4, it outright steals them. Resi took from previous entries before. The rocket launcher is a staple, a self-destruct sequence adding tension through a countdown, puzzles with similar solutions, but that stuff was contextualized by Umbrella as an omnipresent force. It added consistency to our evil conglomerate. The ritualistic hoarding of the skulls was something that was specific to the rituals of Los Illuminados. I guess now that's just something that comes with plague infection. The trip mines that the Magini use are identical in make and model to what the Ganados used. Was Tricell inspired by Los Illuminados weapons manufacturing? It's not about plot holes or asset flips, it's about homogenizing our creepy otherworldly cult with what's happening in Africa. If the feeling of Resident Evil 5 was more confident, I would ask these questions earnestly. Even if the context was somehow there, even if there was a file explaining that the parasite comes with a psychological need to shove vipers in crates, Resident Evil 5 learns the wrong lessons from Resident Evil 4 when it comes to tone.
Are you okay?
Chris and Sheva reach a nearby apartment and meet our first victim and monster. Two Magini pin down a local and force feed him a parasite. His mouth folds outwards, a glint of sharp, razor-like teeth. Wet, slippery retching sounds as he gags, like the sloshing of grease while bacon sizzles in a pan. Chris reaches out to him, asking if he's okay. A dumb move for someone who professionally deals with bioweapons, but it bleeds earnestness. At its core, his mission is about helping people. He's not ready to pull the trigger just yet. Not that it would matter if he was, because the butcher shop and preceding alley are covered in ammunition, healing items, money, and all sorts of useful resources. By the time we hear that terrified scream, we're lugging around enough ammo to kill a boss. The presentation of this setting undercuts 5's attempts to recreate the fear of the other that Resident Evil 4 mastered. That game fell out of time and out of sync with real-life Spain, right down to the currency being used. You'd find pesetas dropped by enemies and lying in decrepit rural shacks, a currency Spain had abandoned. Resident Evil 5 uses Nigerian Naira, a real-world currency currently being used in Nigerian regions today. The game tries to put down roots in an Africa that, while not realistic, is at least familiar to us because of the movies, TV shows, and yes, games that we interact with. As a result, there is no fear of the other here. We've seen it all before in Black Hawk Down. It's quick action and heavy firepower from the word go, despite trying to replicate the feeling of Resident Evil 4.
You don't know what you're talking about! You can all go to hell!
Wait a minute. That's the...
Reynard has been discovered, the victim of a public execution and the harbinger of another Resident Evil 4 parallel. Chris and Sheva get trapped in an ambush with a seemingly unending horde. Tension activated, just like at the start of Leon's adventure. But that tension gets crushed with just a single sentence. In 2005, we didn't know what we were waiting for. The hordes just kept coming. Kill one and two would rush into the square from somewhere off screen. The odds seemed increasingly overwhelming with no end in sight, and it infused panic. Do I have to kill them all? One of them has a chainsaw. Resident Evil 5 turns its zombies vegan with Kirk. The goal of the ambush is spelled out just a minute in when he radios us and tells us how this is going to play out. We just need to hold off until he arrives in his chopper to save the day with some explosions. Don't worry about the reinforcements, you don't need to kill everything. Don't worry about the invisible timer that makes you confused, Kirk keeps calling in to keep you in the loop. Don't worry about the sheer numbers, you get a machine gun in the game's first chapter. This is Marcus Nispel. You might not know his name, but you probably know his films. He directed the remakes of The Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Friday the 13th. In 2009, he was hired by Capcom to direct a series of short films that would form the bedrock of Resident Evil 5's marketing. That series was called Fear You Can't Forget.
Once an image is burned in, it's scarred there forever.
Picking up a few weeks after the game, they show Chris Redfield recovering from what he experienced in Kijuju. PTSD marks him at an awards ceremony, on a date, during training with Claire. It strikes him when he least expects it. It torments him so much that one night, he finds himself standing on the edge of a bridge. They are in Kijuju, flashes on screen, splashes on walls. It is eventually carved into his arm. I'm telling you about them because they showcase how Resident Evil 5 was advertised. Tense, brooding, traumatizing horror that would break Chris Redfield. Even if we ignore these ads, there's this one where we follow Chris alone, surrounded and suffocated by monsters. These adverts zoom in on the horror. They don't pitch Resident Evil 5 as an action title. I'm telling you about them, Alan, so you delete that comment that says, it's an action game, so just judge it as an action game. But okay, let's say that it is an action game. The Steam description says as much. It's listed as action-adventure. Can someone tell Resident Evil 5 that? Speaking to Ugo.com, Jun Decucci, the game's producer, said,
"We deliberately made the knife difficult to use because the knife is a close-range weapon. If you had a close-range weapon that was very easy to use, then it would let you get pretty close to the zombies and hack away at them as much as you wanted to, and that's not what we wanted to create. We wanted you to feel that if you're close to the enemies, you're in trouble. So we made it that if you use the knife, you have to be brave and you have to know what you're doing. So we made it that way so players wouldn't fall back on it very often."
If Resident Evil 5 is an action game, it's a frustrating one that can't decide if we're mowing down mobs as part of an action-packed shoot-a-thon or wrestling with controls defined by friction. Chris and Sheva are awkward when they move because they carry over tank controls. A great way to add tension in a horror game, but not a great way to empower the player in an action game. Cover is just contextual. You can only use it at certain points, and it's incredibly strict, so you'll just bump Chris's face into metal boards until the prompt shows up. If Resident Evil 5 is an action game, why do I need to stop to shoot? Why does the flow of combat constantly get interrupted? Why are proximity mines so precise to the point an enemy needs to walk right over it when combat arenas are so wide? Why don't we heal between chapters? Why is inventory management more restrictive than it was in Resident Evil 4? In fact, the resource system irritated me for the first time ever in a Resident Evil game because it kept getting in the way of the action. In the name of horror and friction, it's a factor to consider. Both Chris and Sheva have 9 slots, and it never feels like enough because in the name of action, you will drown in ammo and supply drops to the point that your backpack is constantly stuffed. The world overflows with resources, but we can only pick up a fraction of them. This gets in the way of the adrenaline rush that's a key feeling when it comes to assessing action. Because I'm approaching this as an action game, 4 of those slots are taken up by the wide variety of weapons that it offers, and 4 of those slots are taken up by ammunition for those weapons. That leaves just 1 slot for a healing item, grenade, or mine. Sheva's inventory is there too, but you can't combine items between the 2 characters. I have a green herb, she has a red herb. I want to combine them, but I can't. I need to move Sheva's herb over to Chris if I want to do that, but I can't do that because both inventories are full. My only option is to discard my ammo, meaning if I want to combine these herbs, I need to lose all of my handgun bullets. It's clumsy, it's unnecessary friction in a game that doesn't benefit from it because of how its scenarios and gameplay systems have been set up. Resident Evil 5 wants you to always be moving and blasting. It doesn't want you to stand still, flipping between inventories. Well, it's not an action game, you say. It's an action horror. It's a Resident Evil game. Any friction is there to enhance the horror and the tension. Sure, I get you, so let's judge it as a Resident Evil horror game then. The name's on the box after all, I don't make the rules. Returning to Jun Takeuchi, he told IGN,
"What we wanted to do was move Resident Evil 5 on from Resident Evil 4, in the same way Resident Evil 2 moved the series on from Resident Evil 1. We wanted to bring out panic horror elements."
Some elements have been refined in the name of the action, but in a way that benefits the horror. The inventory system doesn't flash us into a second screen, it pops up in real time, meaning there's no safety from attack. It's excellent. Picking up items also doesn't introduce full screen pacing resets, and we can set shortcuts by moving items to the top, bottom, left or right inventory slots. It's there so we don't get breaks from the shooting, but what it really means is there's no break from the panic. Player agency comes from the wide range of weapons on offer, something that's key because it means we take ownership of the tension and how to survive the horror, but it isn't earned through the shop or exploration. Our first submachine gun is tossed at us in the first chapter, the second is unmissable in the next. The Tricell lab has a bloody AK-47 just sitting at the bottom of some stairs, and our fourth machine gun, the SIG 556, is just a few rooms after that. Sometimes they're rewards for going off the beaten path, but that is rare. Usually, the weapons are just impossible to miss, like the sniper rifle at the market. These weapons are gifts, especially because Magini are so easy to kill. They take an average of 4 to 5 handgun rounds on normal difficulty, so the player objective isn't running, repositioning or strategizing, it's standing and shooting. The tension fizzles with every automatic weapon that we find. This is partly because they kill the interval between shots that was once so important to Resi, although the fire rate of all of our weapons is so fast from the off that that's not really the problem. The problem is how they kill the threat of enemies like Lickers, Reapers, or body-armored Magini that appear in the game's second half. Exposed arms, enemy design that encourages careful and precise aiming, is pointless. You could just spray and pray with the machine gun and treat these elite monsters like every other bad guy. When it comes to combat, the game runs at 11 all the time. There are no dips, no sequences like say with the Regenerators where you're forced to slow down, take a deep breath, and persevere. Intensity is always the goal, to the point lore dumps and the shop are now thrown into the menu. Say goodbye to the mysterious merchant, he's on the cutting room floor, once known as Shu. You can't read research files or upgrade your weaponry in-game, you need to exit a play session first. The way it reaches for that intensity is in mobs, ambushes, and hordes. Hell, at one point we fight over a dozen Lickers at once, a monster that back in Resident Evil 2 was treated as rare. Back in 1998, the claustrophobia and dread made those moments stand out. This was the panic horror Jun Takeuchi is talking about. Outside of its generally excellent boss fights, the game has one trick: lock Chris and Sheva in a contained location and throw waves of monsters at us. The public execution in our opening is just one example. There's also the oil field, the market, the street to the chainsaw Magini, the Endapaya village, the factory with Josh, I could go on. That is intense the first couple of times, but by the time you enter the third chapter, it all starts to bleed into one unending ambush that feels banal.
Oh my god.
What breaks up that banality are the on-rails, specifically linear sections. Mowing down Magini on motorbikes with a minigun as we blast across the desert. Mowing down Magini on a boat in a sequence reminiscent of the digger section from Resident Evil 4. 2 of our bosses are relegated to turrets. Despite the variety of locations, we're led by the hand constantly, something that undermines the horror that Resident Evil once cultivated so confidently. I'm not going to say with a straight face that these sequences aren't cool, Magini bearing tentacles and fangs as they rev their motorbikes. Slow motion action kicks off a whirling cutscene where our allies snipe at them from rooftops. It's badass, but it also gets in the way of the horror. Isolation is killed because we have friends to help us out. Panic is killed because it's all presented in a cutscene or gameplay that prioritizes feeling cinematic. That means it feels artificial and limits player agency. There is a vastness to the presentation of the whole thing. The ambushes I just listed come with options for the player so they can start finding the fun, even if they can't find the fear. Turrets, ladders to scurry up, turrets, zip lines to whoosh on, turrets. The maps are large to contain the sheer number of bad guys, so you can approach them like a jungle gym. Because these wide combat maps are the majority of the game, it makes those rare, quiet beats, like the caves in the mine, stand out. It's like Resident Evil 5 was designed to purposefully contrast Resident Evil 4. When that game's combat got vast, making up about a third of its playtime, it made us realize just how long we'd spent in cold, oppressive spaces. Resi 5 does the opposite. Vastness makes up 2/3 of its playtime. The mobs we fight quickly grow to become less present as we journey on. The numbers are there, but instead of a hooded behemoth with an axe the size of a man, we're shooting soldiers who can also shoot back. Danger isn't screaming in your face and choking you, it's hiding behind cover, all the way over there. Kajujins went to the same monster school as the Ganados, so they throw dynamite and wield crossbows. But by the time you reach the 4th chapter, any toe dipping with the surreal vanishes because the Magini are replaced with soldiers. They flank, they throw grenades, they clutch AK-47s, and do combat rolls. We can buy a bulletproof vest. Why do I need a bulletproof vest in a Resident Evil game? It feels like the parasites are just an excuse to make us fight normal-looking dudes with weapons. In Resident Evil 4, it felt like a brainwashed town was swarming us, but by the time you're fighting through an aircraft carrier, this feels like a SWAT operation instead of a game prioritizing panic horror. Because of the array of options, like hiding behind cover or leaping behind a turret, we bring the intensity. We're not locked in here with the Magini, they're locked in here with Chris Redfield. Back when I talked about Resident Evil 4, I flagged that I don't care for the beat where a helicopter pilot called Mike suddenly flies in and blows our creepy cult to hell while Leon runs around and scoops up some free ammo. I still don't. An hour from the end of the game, it feels like it comes too early to bring that all-important catharsis. It's unearned, but if Mike was too early, Kirk was born premature. He arrives not once, but twice to save the day. The burning flame of panic horror that is so important to Jun Takuchi is confusingly snuffed out. Soon, at the market, in the game's 2nd chapter, he flies in to mow down the mobs while we take cover and blast alongside him. The argument could be made that Resident Evil 5 front-loads its bombastic blastathon so that it can later be ripped away. Kirk will soon go down in a blazing inferno, leaving Chris and Sheva without the reliable backup of a military chopper. That would be powerful if Kirk's death signaled a tone shift, but if anything, the game gets more action-packed after he dies, and we are constantly reminded that Delta Team is on its way to help out. Instead, it's the death of Alpha Team that brings the fear.
Hey, who did this? Something attacked us. Irving. He got away.
Something has killed Captain Deshant and Alpha Team. In an abandoned concrete complex in the heart of Kajuju's shantytown, we follow a strange trail of sticky black slime to the basement, where a brand new bioweapon is waiting for us. This is Ouroboros. What once was a man is now coated in writhing, shining tentacles, a pulsing orange core wriggling around inside its body. It has 2 weaknesses, destroying the core and fire. The fight is reminiscent of Verdugo from Resident Evil 4, with standard weaponry being useless, so we need to knock over canisters. But long-time hardcore fans won't see Verdugo parallels, they'll see the Leech Man. This was a fight back in Resident Evil Outbreak. The Leech Man would attack the Raccoon City survivors in a lab, bursting out of vents. We needed to lure it into a furnace and blast it with fire. 6 years later, that gimmick returns. It lays a foundation for all of Resident Evil 5's bosses, a reliance on co-op, strategy, and tactical planning. The encounter isn't single-minded, the arena is tight and suffocating. It's a terrifying introduction to the series' newest monster. This is where panic horror manifests. This is fear you can't forget.
Delta Team Captain Stone.
Chris Redfield.
Sheva.
Thanks, Josh. I owe you one.
You guys know each other.
I trained under Josh. He taught me everything I know.
Josh Stone, captain of Delta Team, comes to our rescue before we can mourn Kirk's death. Sheva trained under him, hinting at a long-time partnership. She and Josh mirror Chris and Jill. What's interesting about the action-horror dichotomy is that Resident Evil 5 eventually throws itself into the spooks and nails it. As Josh leaves the duo to continue their investigation, a flash of a memory eats at Chris. A gothic castle, a confrontation with Albert Wesker, Jill Valentine falling to her death. Visions of what turns into the game's greatest achievement, the DLC, Lost in Nightmares.
I, Oswell E. Spencer, founder of Umbrella, as well as its chief executive officer, hereby proclaim myself as ruler of all mankind. Everyone shall prostrate themselves before me as they once did for the ancient false gods.
Memory's a fickle thing. The Fear You Can't Forget series used Kajuju as the foundation for Chris's PTSD, but the horrors he can't forget come full circle with Oswell E. Spencer, CEO of the Umbrella Corporation and self-proclaimed ruler of mankind. In Spencer's European home, Chris saw Jill die. He was haunted by deranged experiments. He waded through contrived puzzles, insane traps, and nonsensical architecture. The horror started in Raccoon City. It happened again in Spencer's estate. As a story, Lost in Nightmares is an hour-long flashback, acting as one massive callback that gives Umbrella's leader some much-needed characterization. As a part of Resident Evil 5, it's a complement to the game's focus on feeling like a climactic finale to everything that came before. As a game, it's a tense, clever hour of horror that tries to recapture the dread of old Resi and for the most part succeeds, even if it relies on nostalgia to pull it off.
Chris to HQ, come in. We're at the target's location.
Copy that, Chris. Move in and procure the target.
Roger that.
3 years before Africa, Chris and Jill track Wesker to Spencer's European home. Since the fall of Raccoon City, he's operated from the shadows, building wealth by selling bioweapons to terrorists. He's public enemy number 1 for the BSAA. Bodies litter the main entrance. Puddles of blood lie separate from Spencer's security guards. They weren't just killed, they were played with, thrown around like rag dolls. It's a stark first impression, a shock of violence that sets the tone of dread from the offset. That's important because it's a while before we see our first monster. Instead, Lost in Nightmares wants us to bask in the gloom. The bodies are the first sign that something is wrong, but for longtime fans, it won't be what stands out. Instead, it's how Spencer's castle looks. The mansion in the Arklay Mountains was based on this place. If zombies roamed the Spencer estate, ghosts haunt Spencer Castle. Pictures of the Earl hang on the walls, always watching, a look of disgust weathering the paint. When we crept along tight corridors in Resident Evil 1 and saw flickering candles or tables prepared for dinner, there was a queasy question that the game forced us to ask. Monsters roam the halls. Why does it look so glorious, so intact? Lost in Nightmares forces a different question because we know Spencer is actively living here. Why is it so run down? Why is there a hole in the second floor landing? Why are rooms that should be bedrooms relegated to dusty, cluttered storage spaces? The answer is that Spencer stopped thinking of his home as a home long ago. Just like the mansion, this is a research station. A building that's fallen apart due to neglect because a madman fell into his experiments. The service staff were dismissed. One solitary butler has tried to keep it all together. In the pit of the castle is a dungeon overflowing with bodies, torture devices, and cages. Zombies are here, but they don't roam, they don't stagger, and they don't resurrect with crimson skin and sharpened nails. They're a hazard, traps that grab us if we get too close without executing them beforehand. A sign that Spencer has been mutilating his victims for a long, long time. Down in the dungeon are the Blobs, a terrible name for a fantastic monster. They swing a massive axe, take a chunk of damage, and we're consistently trapped by them in a funneling, looping corridor where we're forced to shoot, retreat, and retreat again. What is the Blob made of? Unfortunately, Lost in Nightmares doesn't give us much of an answer. The protruding eyeball hints at the G virus. Its similarity to Steve Burnside's mutation hints at T. Veronica. Whatever it is, it's created something terrifying, especially when Chris and Jill fall into some catacombs and lose their weapons. They need to work together to scour a dusty old maze, find colored cranks, and lure the Blobs into traps to get the keys we need. The tone is ancient and withering in its evil, and no less threatening for it. It's Oswell Spencer made manifest.
Kinda takes you back, doesn't it?
To Raccoon City? Unfortunately, yeah. That's where all this started.
Chris and Jill aren't immune to the callbacks. They note that the castle reminds them of the mansion. A dining room sits off the west wing. Cranks open doors. Emblems act as keys. A trap almost squishes Jill into a croque monsieur, and she later needs to play Moonlight Sonata to lower a secret passage in the wall. It's a lot more linear than the first game, with less rooms and puzzles, simply because it's contained as a DLC, but that doesn't stop it from leaning on some old tricks. Checking the main entrance 3 times unlocks fixed camera angles, at least for a short time. Door transitions return to the sound of rapturous applause from my couch. They're quicker, they don't cut away to a separate screen in an inky, sinister void, but they transition in a way that keeps the tension because it adds aching, methodical waiting between rooms. Silence returns, at least during our opening. Not just silence, but negative noise, an absence of sound that once made Chris or Jill's clomping footsteps a way of highlighting how alone and isolated they were. The only thing that's changed now is we hear both of their footsteps. The reassuring tread of our confident partner tells us how far they've both come. What breaks through that silence, eventually, is the brooding, uneasy, spine-tingling jazz that suddenly plays somewhere deep in the castle, somewhere unplaceable. This isn't part of the soundtrack, it's diegetic, locked into the environment. Who's playing a record? Spencer? Wesker? A sick mind celebrates as monsters lurch below. The L-shaped hallway in the East Wing returns, with visions of dogs crashing through windows. That crash happens again, but this time it's just a harmless bat. The DLC knows its audience, and it's happy to toy with us. Sometimes it feels like Lost in Nightmares is an experiment, a curiosity. What would Resident Evil be like if we made it today? Asks Capcom in 2009. What if we cut the QuickTime events, the turrets, and the Kirks? What if we remembered the Gothicism and the puzzles? The answer? Pretty good. I wish they realized that before they started making Resident Evil 5. It's not a beat-for-beat retread. The piano and crest might return, but it's in a storage room, not a bar. New puzzles are present, like needing to burn a piece of heat-sensitive paper in the fireplace to find a computer password. It stops the castle from becoming trite. You need to think like Spencer, and that's more terrifying than anything the game can throw at you. Resident Evil 5's flashbacks hint to it, but Lost in Nightmares is where Oswell Spencer's eugenicist philosophy takes center stage. Forced to live in hiding after Umbrella crumbled, he started to die. A slow, painful death that's likely just because of old age, but possibly because his soul has started to rot. Without the backing of the company he built, Spencer resorted to conducting experiments himself, and when his body failed him, his devoted, pathetic butler Patrick helped. Pathetic isn't an insult, it's a fact. Patrick talks about his mild concern regarding the experiments, but his love of Spencer dominates all of that. His family has always served the Spencers, so he's been raised to look up to them, but it's mainly because he thinks Oswell is a genius. Look at his study full of books, look at the international conglomerate he created, look at the philosophy he misquotes. Never mind Brandon Bailey or his partner James Marcus, who were actually able to engineer the virus. Marcus created purposeful weapons, Spencer created deformed abominations. Pathetic Patrick's inability to question his master's evil or stance as a serious scientist and philosopher flags how much of a loser Oswell Spencer is. He's effectively the main character in a horror series that he created. He's the catalyst for every brutality and every fright that we fought. And now, here he is. An old, decrepit, rambling eugenicist relegated to diary entries and a single cutscene. In his study, we can read his memoirs, and the true purpose of Umbrella comes to light. Immortality, and the creation of an elite race of super beings with him as their leader. Those super beings, the children of Project W, a project that only had 2 survivors, Alex and Albert. That was the idea behind the T-virus. Its purpose as a bioweapon was secondary. It's a madman's plan that explodes into a grand conspiracy and eventually dies with a whimper, evidenced by his final act.
Ironic, isn't it? For one who has the right to be a god. To face his own mortality.
Spencer asked Patrick to ask Ricardo Irving to give Wesker the location of his castle. Spencer knew that Wesker would come because a need to seek him out was programmed into Albert from his early years. Never change, Resident Evil. But Spencer didn't want to just ask him because he wanted Wesker to think it was all his idea. It's convoluted nonsense, but the hope it seemed was to ask Wesker to donate his perfect genes to save Spencer's life. It ended with Albert Wesker killing him. Ruler of mankind indeed. Unfortunately, Lost in Nightmares ends just like Spencer, anticlimactically. Chris and Jill make it to a grand ballroom at the back of the castle to find Wesker waiting for us. Spencer's corpse lies a foot away and a boss fight ensues. There's no trick or gimmick here, not like with the excellent Wesker battles in the main game. Hell, he doesn't even speak aside from regurgitating lines that DC Douglas already recorded in the base game. The goal is to wind down the clock, and when it's all over, Chris watches helplessly as Jill throws herself at Wesker. The pair crash into the ocean below. She sacrifices herself to save her partner. It's a brutal end for Jill, and while the fight that surrounds her supposed death is a bit weak, the music that plays is enough of a goodbye. A remixed, emotional version of Safe Haven, the save room theme from Resident Evil 1. It takes a piece of music that was once a source of relief, and it turns it into something somber. As far as Chris knows, Jill is dead. It's not a theme of safety anymore. It's a theme of mourning.
Sheva, you know where the mines are?
Past the station. Not too far from here. Follow me.
Chris and Sheva follow Ricardo Irving's trail through the mines. It's one of the few times where the game slows down and lets us breathe in the fear. The sheer darkness means either Chris or Sheva need to hold a lantern while the other gets to shooting. It's a beat that's clearly designed for co-op, for communicating where enemies are coming from as the person with the lantern leads. If you play solo, you can swap who carries the lantern, but if you give it to Sheva, she'll just stare at the wall. That means you need to rely on her being a crack shot. Sheva Alomar is not a crack shot. Stop it, Sheva, Jesus Christ. In an interview with GameSpot, Jun Takuchi said,
People have been asking whether the co-op play will take away from the tension and the horror of the game, but from the point of view of the story, we believe we've added a different dimension to horror rather than removed it. We've worked hard on the AI of your partner, so this should benefit novice players.
We've worked hard on the AI of your partner. Well, I worked hard on this video, but it doesn't mean it's any good. Hahaha, like and subscribe. I think it's notable that in a game where Chris is concerned about having a partner and wants to work alone, we are encouraged to play co-op. When playing solo, Sheva's AI makes me feel like Chris, and that isn't on purpose. She joins Carlos Oliveira, Billy Cohen, Jessica Sherowat, and Parker Luciani as partners and colleagues who we'd never see again. That's a shame, because as a character, she has a lot of potential. Someone with a personal vendetta against Umbrella. It exploited her people and killed her family. And despite her tragic past, she's a rigorous optimist. Hurt people don't need to hurt people. She's part of the long line of Resident Evil heroes who embody that. What makes her endearing is that she stays upbeat during fights, but isn't afraid of being vulnerable when shit hits the fan. If you toss her ammo, she quips, "Thanks, partner," something that keeps Chris's arc central in gameplay. If we heal ourselves near her, she heals a bit too, and vice versa, something that adds an interesting dynamic to positioning and resource management. Eventually, she'll sincerely consider abandoning the mission, feeling overwhelmed by the legions of monsters and the lack of support from BSAA Command. In a cast full of tough, gritty heroes, Sheva stands out because she shows signs of cracking and pushes past it. And that is where my praise ends. She gets in the way constantly. If she's not standing right behind you, shooting you in the back, she's standing right in front of you, blocking your shots. If you give her a machine gun, she'll fire single rounds. Unload, Sheva, unload! The way she approaches ammunition is inconsistent. While she keeps us well supplied with bullets for guns she doesn't have, if you're both carrying the same weapon, she'll steal what we need. If you both have shotguns, it'll feel like you're racing her for shells. If it's just her with a shotgun, she'll ignore shells completely, so she's often running on empty. Frustratingly, you can't pick a dominating weapon for her to use. Later, in the ruins, I gave her a sniper rifle so she could cover me from a ridge. Instead, she used her assault rifle, opting for a fire rate of 1 bullet per minute. You can order her into 2 states. Cover has her glued to Chris, again blocking shots or shooting his back, and Attack has her running wildly into the middle of mobs, a prime juicy steak for them to beat to death. She turns the action fest into a painful escort mission, and when we split up, that becomes quite literal. There are short sections where Sheva and Chris go their separate ways, tossing her across a gap or up a ladder so she can grab a key or turn a crank. It's during these sequences that we need to stop and consider what she's carrying and gear her up with a weapon and ammo if she's running low. The awkward way our inventories talk to each other gets in the way here, but during the rare occasions where she's geared up with a shotgun and we're sniping at monsters from across the way, there's a real thrill that comes from working together. But that is not always the case. Soon, we will dive into the marshlands. As we ride around on a boat, there's a beat where enemies block our progress with a barrier. We need to kill them on a bridge overhead to lower that barrier. Sheva tells Chris, "You steer, I'll shoot." But she had no ammo because she'd emptied her chamber into Chris's massive shoulders. What that meant was I needed to turn around, drive all the way back to a nearby island, and snipe them myself because you can't swap weapons if you're in the boat. The game was built for co-op, not for single player supported by AI. Resident Evil Revelations handled partner AI best. There, Jessica or Parker had unlimited ammunition, and they could do damage and stagger enemies, but their damage output was minor. That meant every threat was our responsibility. We only had to look after ourselves, our resource management, and our positioning. Revelations sacrificed the potential for a useful ally with an ally that never ever got on our nerves. But when it comes to Sheva, your best bet is to just treat her like a pack mule. If handled correctly, she can effectively become an extension of our inventory. If you think of her as a combatant, you need to monitor her ammo, if she's got any herbs, swap out weaponry so she just carries one good gun, etc. But if you treat her as a walking backpack, you can stuff her up with grenades, herbs, and ammunition so that Chris's inventory can be dedicated to a Rambo-style one-man army.
You think this is a joke? You're just like all the other pieces of scum terrorists.
Oh, I'm not like them. I'm a businessman with standards.
Drop the weapon.
Or, how about you drop yours?
At last, we find Ricardo Irving, a villain banished to the footnote of Resident Evil's history because of how little presence he has in the 3 chapters all about him. Lending to how RE5 wants to bring the whole franchise full circle, there are unfounded rumors that he was in Raccoon City when it fell. He's petulant, childish, with a scratchy voice that grates on the ear. He takes a page from Ramon Salazar's book, but lacks the memorability because he never bothers the player the same way he bothers Chris and Sheva. He's a coward who doesn't lay traps or trials for us to battle through. Instead, he just gets away with the help of a mysterious cloaked figure. A mob of Magini stand between us and our eventual confrontation with him at a nearby oil field. Lucky for me, and Sheva's AI, my son's on hand to help out. Okay buddy, so shoot the bad guys. Shoot the bad guys. Shoot the bad guys. Don't judge him, he's only 8 months old, but let's substitute him for my wife. She doesn't really play games, something anyone who's watched our Nubis Humanus series can testify to, but the difference to Sheva is stark. Resident Evil 5 is a very different experience when playing with a friend. It doesn't matter how rough your co-op partner is, they can't be worse than Sheva's programming. If you get grappled, they're prompted to run over and punch a monster in the face. If player 1 kicks a Magini in the back and everybody is angled very particularly, player 2 can lash out and bat the monster like a tennis ball. Because of the vastness of combat arenas, there are opportunities to split up when the mobs attack, and what that means is you get a few joyful beats where you're collaborating with your partner. At the end of the game, there's a gauntlet of hangars you need to work through before the final boss. The final hangar has a turret at the far side. That meant my wife could grab the turret and gun down monsters while I distracted them. It was the most fun I had the whole game. When the shit hits the fan, getting to physically speak to each other, give advice, ask for help, naturally ups the feeling of panic. It's psychological. Communicating with a partner is another thing to think about, so the emotional labor you put into the game is greater. But when it comes to QuickTime events, no amount of communication can fix how confusing the setup is. On very, very rare occasions, Sheva gets her own unique cutscene prompts that only appear when playing together. But really, that is only present during the final battle with Wesker. It's generally unclear who should be pressing a prompt during sequences like the motorbike attack. Look at this prompt. Whose responsibility is this? Both Chris and Sheva are in danger. If I press square and my wife presses triangle, does that trigger a fail state? Do we both need to press the correct prompt? It seems to typically default to whoever presses the correct button, but what about here? This QuickTime event is all about Sheva. She needs to press square to fire the gun. But if she presses triangle and I press square, the QuickTime event is read as successful. You might think that this keeps things simple. When in doubt, both players should respond to the QuickTime event, and so long as someone does it properly, the partners will succeed. But sometimes, like the chase with Excella, that's not the case. I hammered square, but my wife jammed X. That meant that we failed. It's muddled, messy, and inconsistent.
Don't know what that thing is, but I'm sure Irving's responsible.
This is the Popocatamu, translating from Swahili as generous bat. It's the bioweapon Ricardo Irving is planning to sell, explicitly designed by infecting a bat with Las Plagas. Its legs and wings have doubled in size. Its body is shielded by a hard carapace. The only way we're going to kill it is by targeting its soft underbelly. Thankfully, because I'm playing with someone, we can use Sheva as bait. This is a tactic the game regularly leans on with its boss fights. Back when we fought Ouroboros, we could get it to follow us into the furnace. Later, when Wesker steps into shot, we can distract him long enough for our partner to shoot a rocket at him. With Popocatamu, we need to use proximity bombs to slow it down because its shell is too hard to penetrate. But once those run out, we're meant to trap it between Chris and Sheva. That means at least one person can target its weak spot. It's a boss fight designed for cooperative play. Speaking to Co-Optimus, Chris Kramer, Capcom's Senior Director of PR and Community, talked about this new approach.
Adjusting the pace and the action of the Resident Evil series was our biggest challenge. Since players now had backup, we had to make enemies faster and have them come from multiple directions simultaneously. The Resident Evil 5 team had spent time with other co-op titles like Halo 3 and Gears of War to see how those games addressed co-op gameplay.
Fun with friends can bring thrill, but with Resident Evil 5 that is much to the detriment of its single-player experience. A lot of combat arenas and bosses feel built around a partner. This is something Resi 6 will later go on to refine and further expose as a problem. Because it always, without exception, detracts from fear and tension. Looking at a session of, say, Phasmophobia compared to a playthrough of Resident Evil 7, you'll see different emotional states, even when they're exaggerated by streamers. Co-op offers a safety net, a shoulder to lean on, backup to heal you, chatter to distract. You're not annoyed at ravenous drooling monsters, you're annoyed that your partner got downed again so you've got to run over and help them. You're annoyed that they failed a QuickTime event so you've got to replay a cutscene. And what a partner does in Resident Evil 5, whether it's online or off, is offer numerous second chances. If you get downed, Sheva can rush over to patch you up. There should be no second chances in a horror game. It dampens the stakes. Is Resident Evil 5's depiction of Africa racist?
Racist?
Racism.
Racism? The game has not aged well.
Stick with me because I think the answer is more nuanced than people give the game credit for. There's an attempt to say something here, it's just muddled by the cartoonish representation of culture that is part of Resident Evil's identity. On IGN, Matt Purslow came down hard on his position. In the Resident Evil game that can't be remade, he wrote,
"Intentionally or not, Resident Evil 5 positions Africa as the Dark Continent, an uncivilized world harboring a diseased population that needs gunning down by Western intervention in the name of global security."
Ruthless comparisons have been made between Resident Evil 5's Africa and Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, two stories that portray Africa as a rabid, bleak, uncivilized corner of the world. Careful, stay here for too long and you might go mad like Kurtz. Look at Conrad's writing and tell me if you see Resident Evil 5. All about, others were scattered in every pose of contorted collapse, as in some picture of a massacre or pestilence. While I stood horror-struck, one of these creatures rose to his hands and knees and went off on all fours towards the river to drink. Is it fair to compare Resident Evil 5 to Heart of Darkness? It's an interesting lens, but doing so misses the wide text of what Resident Evil is as a franchise. Raccoon City isn't an accurate representation of a Midwestern town. Valdelobos isn't an accurate representation of Spain. Kujuju isn't an accurate representation of Africa. But what makes Resi 5 feel different is that it tries to be and fails, to the point that Capcom took photos of African regions to capture the feeling. Talking to Kikizo, Jun Takuchi said,
"When we went to Africa to do research for the game, we took a lot of photographs and notes to try and recreate the scenery and atmosphere. What we're trying to do in-game is to recreate as accurately as we can what we saw with our own eyes."
And what that design philosophy does is make Africa really fucking boring.
This is headquarters. What's your situation?
There's a high probability that Irving is on his way to an oil field in the marshlands. We're rejoining Delta Team and heading there now.
Understood.
The oil field is our next target. A sheet of desert stands between us and Irving. Thankfully, Josh arrives with the roar of a Humvee and a legion of Magini on motorbikes, so all the explodey bits don't need to slow down. An on-rails vehicular turret section is followed by a turret-based boss fight. This is Ndesu. The game says that the name comes from Central African folklore, referring to a man-eating demon. I can't find evidence of this anywhere. It seems Ndesu doesn't exist in Central African folklore at all, though ogres, often characterized as riddle givers rather than rampaging monsters, do appear in Eastern African folklore. What Ndesu is a reskinned El Gigante from Resident Evil 4, a creature that was meticulously created under specific scientific conditions by Los Illuminados. This wasn't just a creature made with Las Plagas, particular experiments made it. Somehow, its less threatening, less interesting cousin is in Africa. Chris and Sheva sit in a static jeep. We transition into a first-person perspective as we unload on it using a heavy machine gun turret. Why doesn't Ndesu pick up the jeep? In Resi 4, it could smash through buildings. Why are there two infinitely respawning Magini just sniping at us from a nearby rooftop? Sheva points out that we need to shoot the weak points. We're not given agency to figure Ndesu out for ourselves. Look, there's something coming out of it, she yells as control is wrenched away from us for a cutscene that repeats. We should try aiming at those. I don't know guys, should we make a new monster? Nah, slap a beard on El Gigante, that'll do. The most challenging thing here is making sure my gun doesn't overheat. Now that's a shame, because Resi 5 keeps the toe dipped in African folklore to inform its monsters. What makes the Popo Karamu so interesting is that it links to Popo Bawa, a shape-shifting demon that adopts the form of a giant bat. But in the middle of a grey shantytown, slapped into the middle of an endless desert, is something stolen from Resident Evil 4, just not as good. Because those comparisons return, let's line Resident Evil 4 Spain up with Resident Evil 5's Africa. That game set itself in an ambiguous, initially unnamed, unrealistic depiction of Spain to translate our fear of the other. Resident Evil 5 tries to ground itself in geopolitics. Kujuju is fictional, but it mashes together parts of Africa to create a blob of a setting without character or identity. A modern yet impoverished cityscape, vast screams of desert and marshlands. Oil fields. The game glues together numerous scenes to give us geography that we recognize and that kills the otherworldly feeling. Africa is a continent, not a country, but Resident Evil 5 treats it like a county. Americans, imagine if Raccoon City smashed together Hawaii, New York, the Mojave Desert, and Louisiana swampland, and you would get an idea of what happens to Kujuju. The most frustrating thing is you don't need to look very far to find interesting landmarks in Africa that could have laid a foundation. This is the University of Ghana. Look at this. Look at its wide grounds, towering trees, and potential for old conspiracies and nightmarish puzzles. One day we will get a Resident Evil game set in a university, I know it. Or what about this? The National Assembly of Nigeria. Resident Evil 5 drops Chris into a fictionalized political hotspot, but we never see the seat of government, despite many African countries having impressive, fascinating political buildings. What about a zoo? Africa's known for its variety of wildlife and nature reserves. Perhaps Tricell could have been running one that, on the down low, was just a means for them to experiment on animals. I mean, if you wanted inspiration for a tense, man-made jungle, here's the exotic gardens of Buknadel. I'm not saying any of these locations should have been scanned into the game, but they could have served as inspiration for cool, creepy settings that didn't feel homogenized. What do the Magini want? What happened to set Kujuju on fire? It's destabilized, but how? What's the governing body like? What was it like before the bioweapons were released? Who was buying bioweapons from Ricardo Irving? Every Resident Evil game prior to this one made a point of telling us about the before and showing us the after, but 5 doesn't seem interested in that. We never meet a Kajujin who fills us in. Instead, we get Africa through the lens of Ridley Scott, right down to tire fires set up to signal attack. It turns out that that's all on purpose. If the original Resident Evil was inspired by horror films like Dawn of the Dead, Resi 5 was inspired directly by Black Hawk Down. That probably explains the obnoxious changing aspect ratio and oversaturated color palette.
Chris, look around. We should both get the hell out of here.
I'm not here just for the mission.
What are you talking about?
A while back, I received some intel that my old partner was still alive. At first, I didn't know what to think. But when I saw the data file from Delta Team, I knew for sure. Jill is still alive.
In the chaos of Ndesu's attack, Josh goes missing. Sheva tries to talk Chris into abandoning the mission, but he finally comes clean. An old partner seems to be wrapped up in this somehow. The data they've recovered hints that Jill is in Africa. Sheva understands. She has her own confession. Years ago, her parents were killed by Umbrella. They were using Africa as a testbed for experiments, she says bitterly. And with that line, we catch a glimpse of what RE5 is trying to do. Sheva's actor, Karen Dyer, told TechCrunch,
"The allegations of racism are a bunch of baloney. Sheva wasn't an afterthought, this is a co-op game. It takes a lot more time to just whip that together. It seems a bit ridiculous to just do that as a type of reaction and say all of a sudden, yeah, let's make it co-op."
Josh's actor, TJ Storm, has supported her claims. Both characters are particularly important to this whole conversation because their position as our rational, self-sufficient partners make them the representatives for the real Africa. Sheva personifies the Africa that's trying to escape the malicious colonialism of Umbrella, Tricell, and Albert Wesker. Kajujins aren't the bad guys, eugenicists are. Instead, they're the victims of, notably, white outsiders who used Africa as a testbed for experiments and invaded it to steal precious resources. We soon find a camp full of tents and scientific equipment. This all belongs to Tricell, our new evil conglomerate, and a company that bought up many of Umbrella's assets when it eventually crumbled. It's a company founded on xenophilia regarding Africa and later exploitation of the continent. All of its profits come from that foundation, dating all the way back to the 19th century. Ricardo Irving isn't just a weapons dealer, he's in charge of an oil field over the ridge that was slowly colonizing the village of the Ndapaya tribe. Resident Evil 5 doesn't set out to demonize Africa, it demonizes colonialism. But then we hit Chapter 3, and suddenly it's hard to take any of that seriously. The Wetlands plops us into a boat and asks us to ride around running over African people in tribal gear, the Ndapaya. They're not treated with curiosity. Secretive tribes like the Ndapaya exist today, the Dogon, Afro-Bolivians, but despite Capcom's insistence on a realistic portrayal of Africa, there's nothing that connects the Ndapaya to tribes we know of. That was on purpose. In an effort to avoid a problematic depiction, the artist Yoshinori Matsushita emphasized that they shouldn't be tied to any real society. On the surface, that's noble, and it brings the fantastical back to Resident Evil 5, something it's in dire need of by the time we reach the Wetlands. But it doesn't take away from the fact that the Ndapaya are reduced to a savage caricature of Africans. They burst out of reeds with bows and arrows, spears, terrifying ceremonial masks, and reeds covering their naked bodies. Their homes aren't lived in, they're set dressing for all the shooting. For some reason, the anthropologist Glenn Bauman was asked for his opinion on the whole racist, not racist issue, and his conclusion was that the game is not racist. Here's what he said, pulling from an article on Wired.
They've got to you somewhere as a threat, and as far as I know from what you've told me, the last game used rural Spain as a threat. Basically, if you want to make a frightening scene, you take whatever characteristics of that scene are salient and turn them malign.
By his own admission, Glenn hasn't played Resident Evil 5, and if he had, I think his answer would change when he got to the Wetlands. The Ndapaya are a new enemy faction that hit harder, are spongier, and leap around animalistically, contrasting the more human approach of the other Majini. And this is something that Hanley Geyser and Pippa Shabalala argue in their essay Return to Darkness, Representations of Africa in Resident Evil 5. Quote,
There is a conceptual association between the notions of the traditional African, the uncontrolled, the bloodthirsty, and the zombie. The village provides the location for the breakdown of civilization, which has resulted in the villagers reverting to what is depicted as a more primitive state. This reversion is accompanied by a bodily shift as well. In Kijuju, the shift between the zombified and natural state was ambiguous. Here, the infection is accompanied by a physical mutation to the animal.
Their tribal presentation is here to up the fear because it's less recognizable than the infected civilians that we fought so far. And as far as Resident Evil 5's visual design is concerned, African tribes are a tool to make us scared. This isn't like Spain. I think it's really important to flag that. Resident Evil 4 was far more fantastical in how it took the Ganados and transformed them into a terrifying other for us to fight. There was nothing recognizable about what made them weird because the game was generally contextualized by the wild, the wonderful, the magical, and most importantly of all, the fictional cult that characterized all of it. Somehow, a mysterious castle had gone undisturbed for centuries while leading an isolated village in the middle of nowhere. Somehow, that village had a retinal scanner and a cable car, despite the residents living in old shacks and farming with primitive tools. Somehow, a purple-robed wizard with a magic Plaga staff was controlling people. Resident Evil 5 doesn't have a wizard or a cult or Bowser's castle. It has modern markets, apartments, motorbikes, TVs, and radios. Then suddenly, whoosh, here's the Endopia, a tribe out of time, with a foundation and recognizable imagery that's been used to paint black people as savage, like in the days of Joseph Conrad. But the real issue is how Resident Evil 5 tries to explain it. In the heart of the Endopia's village is a diary that documents how the tribe slowly became infected.
April 5th. A man who said he was the foreman of the oil plant came to visit us today. He said he wants to inoculate everyone living near the oil field against some kind of disease. April 11th. Outside I saw a man who looked strange. He was naked and had a weapon. His entire body was covered in war paint. It wasn't even festival day. April 12th. The screaming has not stopped since yesterday. The men are all dressing like our ancestors and fighting each other. Most of the women have died.
The only reason the Endopia looks like this is because Las Plagas has made them go mad. This doesn't just happen to some of the tribe, it happens to every single member. According to Resident Evil 5, embracing tradition is a symptom of Plaga infection. It's not a good enough excuse, because it is just that, an excuse so we can run around an unfamiliar tribal village and shoot Africans in war paint. But not only that, it retroactively makes the portrayal of Los Illuminados pretty boring as well. Say goodbye to the weird, unexplainable setting of Resident Evil 4. It seems the only reason the Ganados felt out of time in the original game is because the Plaga psychologically changed an entire society and made them start dressing in old clothes and using old currency. In a story where our big bad rants about killing people with inferior genes and creating a race of super beings, should Resident Evil really be this cartoonish with how it represents the Endopia? I love Resident Evil 5 for being about something, but in doing so it achieves the impossible. It's a victim of that patented Resident Evil cheese depicting corners of the world through an outlandish lens, while also being incredibly, exhaustingly mundane. Chris and Sheva blast their way out of the wetlands and through the clanking metal pipes of an oil field. It's not quite Castle Salazar, is it? Nobody would blame you if you forgot that Resident Evil 5 had puzzles. But it does, a whole sum of them. But they are almost exclusively packed into one chapter, the underground city of the Endopia. That's because the game wants us to focus on all the explosive shooting and turret sections, evidenced when Chris and Sheva finally confront Ricardo Irving.
Won't you two just die already? You're making me look bad!
A theme park-esque boat race ends with us boarding Irving's boat. Forever a weasel with a complex, he moans that everyone looks down on him, injects himself with Las Plagas, and transforms into a huge, tentacular leviathan. In keeping with the Ramon Salazar comparisons, he even looks like him with his boss design. A huge cocoon of teeth opens up, revealing a fetal, slimy body. This is the second boss we'll fight from behind a turret. Because Irving is so large, he sloshes around in the water, forcing Chris and Sheva to run to a nearby machine gun or missile launcher and unload on him. It's over before it can begin, with Irving's death as wet and gross as his personality. His final words are mocking, and it seems like he knows who Chris is. Who told him we were coming? The plot thickens. A nearby cave offers refuge, a network leading into a mysterious, spectacular underground city and temple full of strange murals. As a Resident Evil flavoured action sequence, it's fantastic. It pulls from Indiana Jones rather than Black Hawk Down. Resi 5's level design is typically made up of combat arenas and corridors with occasional dead ends. The temple is laid out like a labyrinth and a maze. Down here we find one of two rewards for exploration. The wetlands had a rocket launcher. The ruins now have a grenade launcher. The power of this moment stands out because it's designed that should return much more often than it does. Where Resident Evil 4 masked the ancient evil of Las Plagas behind 4 simple rooms, Resident Evil 5 locks its secrets behind meteoric balls of fire, booby-trapped walkways, and mysterious statues. But it also feels like all the traps and puzzles were shoved into this single bit to make up for their absence elsewhere. The dawn of yellow paint wasn't quite upon us yet in 2009, so the railroading was far more overt. If we jump back to the Kajuju Autonomous Zone, we see a great example of how the game refuses to let us think for ourselves. In the market, there's a man hanging from the ceiling of a shack. He has a key. We see it glint as we enter. We can investigate the body to get a closer look at the key, meaning we can then choose to shoot the body so the key will drop. Lovely. And then the game forces a cutscene to draw attention to the key we already knew was there. If we didn't, why would we have shot it? Taking that key opens a gate that is less than 5 feet away. I am counting this as one of the game's puzzles. If you think I'm being choosy, let me jump ahead to the aircraft carrier. A door is locked and we need 2 key cards. A minigun Magini pins us down and we need to kill him. Doing so gives us a key card. Where's the other key card, I wonder? 2 feet from his body, okay. Actually, you know what? There are so few puzzles in the game, let's count them down. There are 6 in total, and I've just described 2. The remaining 4 challenge us to find some beast slates in the wetlands. There are no layers to this. We ride to an island, pick one up, and get back in our boat while Endopia attack. It's barely a hunt because they're marked on our map. Inserting those slates into the door is automatic. We don't need to fit them in a specific order. Find some temple slates in the ruins. There are no layers to this either, but as we fight Endopia, a giant focused laser beam blasts at us to keep the tension. It's a fun section, but hardly a head scratcher. Find 4 statues and pull chains to transform a sacred chamber. It raises and lowers a staircase, making the chamber feel like a surreal MC Escher painting. Enemies leap out of secret passages and ambush us as we frantically find our way through, ending with a rematch against Popo Kadamu. While it doesn't teach us anything specifically about the ancient people who once worshipped here, it at least lets us interact with their history and see iconography that relates to their gods. The final puzzle makes us work through a laser chamber that harks back to Resident Evil 4. We reflect light off mirrors down in a tomb beneath the temple. What makes it stand out is what happens if we go in blind. Scuttling parasites are unleashed. The puzzles in Resident Evil 5 aren't bad, they're just nearly non-existent. When they appear, they add texture and variety, hinting at the depth the game might have had if it trusted the players to slow down and think. But ultimately, our adventure defaults to action, to noise, and to shooting. Puzzles are treated less like essential ingredients to the Resident Evil recipe, and more like an afterthought, briefly indulged and quickly discarded. The truth is, the game doesn't really want us solving anything. The temple is a glimpse of what Resident Evil 5 could have been if it had more confidence in environmental storytelling and less in heavy artillery. Unlike 4, which scattered small environmental puzzles throughout to veil the truth of Las Plagas, 5 shoves everything puzzly into this one segment. It contextualizes the danger of the progenitor virus. Many trials stand between us and what was buried here. It should have stayed hidden.
Umbrella?
What? What was Umbrella doing?
I don't know. It doesn't look like anyone's been around for a while.
A host of flowers in the bowels of the temple. With every laser puzzle solved, we go deeper and deeper to the point the depth seems almost impossible. Sickly spores trickle from their pistils. This is the stairway to the sun, Sonnentrep. Years ago, Oswald Spencer discovered it. This is why the ruins are booby-trapped. For generations, the Endopia had their king eat the flower and it would grant them superhuman abilities. For the right, you had to prove yourself. Through sheer force of will, Chris and Sheva stumble into the cradle of the progenitor virus.
What have they done?
Jill.
I've never been so happy to find an Umbrella facility. Back when they discovered the Sonnentrep flower, Umbrella moved into the temple, setting up a research complex to study the plant and extract the progenitor virus. Spencer, along with his partners James Marcus and Brandon Bailey, tried to bring the flower home, but when they did, their experiments failed. Umbrella couldn't replicate the virus that grew from it. It seems like it was only under the special conditions of Kajuju that the virus would grow. But as we explore, Umbrella's ghost fades, replaced with the logo of Tricell. They've continued Umbrella's research, but who's leading them? Deeper into the lab is a humongous vertical laboratory. Capsules line the walls with bodies inside, periodically dropped into the pit below. Failed experiments, discarded without personal input. It's like Sheva said, Africa's been treated as a testbed for experimentation, and insultingly, Tricell have automated their cruelty. Chris desperately logs into the system and searches for Jill. Is she here? The answer leads to more questions. A capsule with her name on it is empty. What makes the facility stand out is that it actually broods. After hours of concrete apartments and open arenas, we're finally encouraged to take a deep breath and wander through Umbrella's dead halls. It's all in service of a lore dump to explain how the progenitor virus eventually became the T virus, but that doesn't mean it lacks intention. Scratches mark the walls, captured animals rattle in cages. The transition from a natural aesthetic in the wetlands to an institutionalized shiny lab ripped out of science fiction brings tonal whiplash that is so effective because it feels so impossible. The impact is dampened if you've played the remakes of Resident Evil 2 and 3, but if we look at Resident Evil 5 through the lens of the original timeline, there's a terrifying grandness to the facility. Every game that preceded this one had a lab, but every one of those labs are murky, dingy, rusting, and refurbished. Even Resident Evil 2's chemical factory, with its huge vertical drop and metal walkways, doesn't compete to how clean and futuristic this looks. It's Tricell's corporate philosophy explained through environmental design. They're Umbrella, but 10 times more competent, taken to a grand scale. Resi 5 does drizzle some occasional tension into his bang bang blast time. For example, when we meet our first Majini, he doesn't give the player a chance to prepare. He doesn't stagger towards us. Instead, in the name of panic horror, he charges as the cutscene transitions into gameplay with arms outstretched, eyes wild and nails sharp. Another comes from the wetlands. At one point, we need to trudge through murky, waist-high water as crocodiles thrash around. If they catch you, it's a one-hit kill. Here in the lab, there's a section where we need to walk past a huge window, watching as lickers pad around, ears cocked, listening for prey. The game toys with you because if you do sneak past them, you're rewarded with a loud, slow elevator. The lickers attack, and you need to hold out until it arrives. It's incredibly effective, but that efficacy shows that RE5 relies on the same trick over and over, starting Chris and Sheva in a claustrophobic space and releasing a flood of enemies. And while the first half of the lab is still and icy and unnerving, the second half is where the game officially shits the bed. From this point on, interesting environmental design vanishes. Say what you like about the context of the wetlands, but at least it was visually distinct. Our last third is set in a factory and an aircraft carrier, and it quickly all blurs into one grey blob. Majini wave AK-47s and toss grenades. Chris and Sheva need to duck down behind cover. Industrial room after industrial room are sewn together nonsensically, with just a conveyor belt and waste disposal to add level narration. It's all hangars and walkways and consoles. It exposes the first half of the lab for what it was. A room to lock the story in so it doesn't get in the way of the shooting. If there was any fear before, it's turned into fear we can forget. But hey, at least a badass boss is around the corner.
Where is Jill?
Jill? Even if I did know, you think I would tell you?
Excella Gione is the regional director of Tricell's Africa division. She's overshadowed by two giant distractions: Wesker's reveal and the bioweapon U-8. She claims that the BSAA were lured here just to wipe out the investigation into Tricell, but we'll soon learn that Excella is just a bit player in a grand revenge plot. She thinks she's more important than she is, motivated by a thirst for Albert Wesker. What separates her from Irving is how she becomes a nuisance for the player as well as our characters. It's always fun when a Resident Evil baddie monologues and mocks, but what really works is how she unleashes not one but two monsters on us. The first is Ultimate 8. Despite the letter, U8 shouldn't be confused with U2 or U3 from Resident Evil 4. The only thing that connects them is their origin with Las Plagas. What once was a spider is now a scaly, hard-shelled behemoth. It's an arthropod, closer to crustacean than insect. It rocks. The scale of the thing fills the screen, so fighting it feels like an impossible task. Its humongous swipes force scrappy play because they telegraph easily, but often come from out of shot. There are options to how we take it down too. Unloading every round works, but the goal is to stun it and make it choke on a grenade. It steps out of a monster movie and delivers. Unlike Capcom's ambition for a tense Africa. CrimsonHead.com reported that Jun Takuchi said the following in a production meeting.
Up till now, light was never a factor in any Biohazard games. When you're in a bright place, it's very difficult to see into the shadow. Your pupils contract when there's a lot of light, but this makes it hard to see. By focusing on that element, we were able to escalate the player's fear of darkness, stepping into the shadows from a place where your eyes have adapted to the light. In those few moments until your eyes adapt, you're playing a game where you can't see, and that really fans the fires of panic.
Almost every interview I could find mentioned Africa's brightness in one way or another, to the point that it seems Africa was chosen as the setting because of how it challenged the preconceived notion that the player would be safe in the light. You might think it was to show the origins of the progenitor virus, but back when Resident Evil 4 was being developed, that was already a plotline Capcom believed could be covered in a strange medieval castle. Early trailers talked about the virus, and we were nowhere near Africa. Resident Evil 5's early trailers showed that ambition. Sunlight creeping through holes in the roof, barely enough to see ahead, the outside world forcing us to squint. The focus was an extreme contrast of light versus darkness. The hot, blinding sun that beats down on Africa was to be turned into a weapon. When Chris and Sheva pushed through dusted streets, it's clear the goal was to make interior locations eerie and abstract because they're so dark compared to what came outside. This was apparently tech that the Xbox 360 could offer, where prior consoles struggled. It's a fascinating, ambitious way to look at tension. Light as dangerous, and notably something Ridley Scott masters in Black Hawk Down. Capcom were all too aware of this, because they said as much in the art of Resident Evil 5. But in practice, the game only capitalizes on its lighting once, the short sequence in the mine where we need to carry a lantern. It's a great beat for bringing a fear of the dark, but every other location is saturated with lighting that is bland and hides nothing. Even the temple ruins, even in the first half of the Umbrella Labs, where the corridors are dark, we find our way easily, and the shadows are so simple that none of them ever threaten to jump out. And as for outside, does this look like blinding, terrifying exposure to you? What about this? A sandy beige color palette that bleeds into nothingness. Modern Resident Evil uses light transitions and a delay when the character pulls out their torch to enhance tension. You're waiting for Leon's eyes to adjust, for Claire to flick her flashlight, for Ethan to blink against bright daylight. None of that happens in Resident Evil 5, likely because the Xbox 360 wasn't quite powerful enough for Capcom's ambition. That ambition stretched to survival mechanics as well. With Africa being as hot as it was, and Chris not being from around here, we'd have to battle the sun as well as the Majini. The plan was that Chris would need to drink water or recover in the shade if we stayed in the light for too long, meaning the environment itself would become a hazard, not just the monsters that lurked in it. There were also rumors that heat stroke could lead to mild hallucinations, but I can't find an interview that talks about that directly. Even without the hallucination angle, this could have been quite interesting. If paced methodically, it could have made Resident Evil 5's tension feel unique. In the final product, that has been scrapped. Another interesting piece of friction left on the cutting room floor for the final build. Hell, typewriters were tossed aside as well. They're not needed anymore because the game has an incredibly generous checkpoint system that destroys what moment-to-moment tension there might have been. Look at the opening of Chapter 2. The game saves, a cutscene plays, we walk through a door, and we save again. Good thing too, because the second monster Excella throws at us is a toughie.
You've spent so long trying to track down Ouroboros. Well, here, enjoy.
Ouroboros Mkono takes its name from the Swahili word for arm, a sensible label because the damn thing waves it around frantically, swatting Chris and Sheva aside like bugs. There's no furnace to trap it in this time, just a wide lab, fiery gas canisters, and the flamethrower. This is so powerful because it's treated like a puzzle. Because we fought a version of it already, we know that fire is the trick, but having the furnace ripped away from us brings an initial sense of panic. Incendiary grenades, the grenade launcher, they become useful tools to rely on, but without them they're just wasting ammo while it wails on you. The flamethrower acts on a cooldown, so you need to keep returning it to the charging station, and if you're not well armed, you're left vulnerable while a timer ticks down. It's a solid fight, because the odds initially feel quite impossible, but something even more dangerous waits ahead of it. In 1996, Albert Wesker stood in a laboratory admiring the T2 Tyrant. He claimed that it was the ultimate life form, and his belief that it was a super being put him at odds with Umbrella's orders to destroy it. When Chris Redfield laughed at how ludicrous that was, I mean just look at it, it's got a big throbbing weak point on its chest, Wesker got offended. Resident Evil 5 wonderfully takes this beat, this search for the ultimate life form, and turns it into his whole character.
Isn't this one big family reunion? I would expect you to be happier to see us.
Wesker's plan is stupid, and I love it. He makes his dramatic return as we track Excella out of the lab and back into the ancient city. A ceremonial chamber and crypt coats his grand return with a stink of death and a tragic reveal. The masked figure that's appeared haphazardly in our adventure is Jill Valentine. Brainwashed, experimented on. All those years ago when they battled Wesker, she survived, and Wesker turned her into his own personal bioweapon. Oh, Jill. Wesker's arrival breathes some much-needed life into the game, purely because he's so charismatic, so over-the-top, and such a fun villain to watch in action. He is the perfect bioweapon. Enhanced strength, super speed, a ruthless cold killing machine that's always, for the whole franchise, been 10 steps ahead of us. Under the umbrella of every Resident Evil game before now, he is an impossible threat. So, as a narrative designer, how do you frame that? Wesker is simply too powerful, even with our shiny new AK-47. He should be able to whirl across the hall and slit my throat. Well, easy. You double down on his arrogance. Albert Wesker likes to play with his food.
7 minutes. 7 minutes is all I can spare to play with you.
Wesker is fast and hits hard. Bullets do hurt him, but he's so spongy that you might as well not bother. Sheva can heal you if you get hit, but she'll probably just stand and watch as Wesker grinds Chris' bones to make his bread. Do something, Sheva! We have 3 options when it comes to dealing with him. Run, or hide, or fight. We can sprint around for 7 full minutes, dodging his attacks in an exhausting war of attrition. We can whittle down his health. It won't do much, but he will eventually claim that he's bored and leave early. Or we can run deeper into the ruins and hide, goosebumps crawling as he hunts for us. If we can stay out of view for 3 to 4 minutes, he will, again, declare that he's bored and leave us in peace. His ego is so great that the only way to survive him is to exploit that. It's fantastic. People reference the boulder punch or complete global saturation, but 7 minutes with Wesker is the best part of the entire game. It's thrilling to finally fight him after a decade of watching helplessly as he pulls the strings of Resident Evil. It's terrifying to realize you can't kill him. It's goofy and charming that our first confrontation resorts to 7 minutes in heaven, Wesker edition. As a side note, I love that goofy and charming angle remains with his sunglasses. Because Wesker is infected himself, it would have been all too easy to write a file somewhere that explains his eyes are sensitive to light, explaining the shades. I am glad we never get that. Not everything in Resident Evil needs to be laboriously explained. Wesker wears shades because he's extra. Where has this been all game? Where is this pitch-perfect understanding of what Resident Evil 4 added to the Resident Evil tone? It wasn't missing, it was just waiting for its dramatic entrance. The beat is slightly weakened by Wesker's presence earlier. Somewhat randomly, he's spoiled in a scene that's shoved into the middle of the sequence in the temple. Excella injects him with a strange serum and tries to seduce him. Wesker considers her, says that perhaps she can join him in his new world. That word perhaps shows his focus on purity. If Excella is to join him, she'll need to prove she's part of his race of super beings. She will soon fail that trial. So, what exactly is Wesker's project?
One glimpse of my new world, and it will all make perfect sense.
Show yourself!
Unfortunately, it's too late for you.
Complete global saturation. His plan is to kill at least 6 billion people. Spare only those who pass a genetic litmus test, individuals whose biology is compatible with Ouroboros. Those who fail the test are consumed. Their bodies rupture into oily tendrils of shrieking black mass, indistinguishable from one another. The worthy ascend, the unworthy roam the earth as shambling monsters. It's a little bit terrorism, little bit control, but it's mainly eugenics. That's not subtext, it's on the goddamn wiki. And it's now that I realize how much I've tossed this term around while covering Resident Evil, but some of you might not know what I'm talking about, so a brief explanation of eugenics. Jesus Christ, this is a video on Resident Evil 5. In the simplest terms, eugenics is the belief that the human race can be improved by controlled breeding, by encouraging the reproduction of people with desirable traits and preventing the reproduction of those with undesirable ones. At best, it's pseudoscience. At worst, it's genocide in a lab coat. It emerged in the late 19th century and gained traction in the early 20th. The movement was championed by losers, politicians, and fascist regimes alike, most notoriously the Nazis, as a way of justifying racial superiority. But it's not all about race. Eugenics is desperate to be taken seriously as a science, so it spreads its tendrils into lots of different corners. Eugenicists like Helmut Nyborg proposed poor women be banned from having babies to, quote, avoid degenerates in the population. Charles Davenport wanted to castrate criminals, alcoholics, and sexual deviants. And this actually happened. In the 1920s, the United States legally castrated over 70,000 people. Here in the UK, apparent hero of the people, Winston Churchill, helped draft the Mental Deficiency Act that imprisoned people categorized as idiotic and imbecilic. He called for a need to protect thrifty, energetic, and superior stocks. Yikes. Albert Wesker looks at all of humanity at this point in our evolutionary cycle and simply believes it's not good enough. Somehow, emphasis on the somehow, he's calculated that a seventh of the human race has a superior gene that can be mutated. He wants to build a race of people just like him. Wesker's backstory makes his obsession with eugenics personal. Raised, experimented on, and brainwashed as part of Project W, a covert experiment orchestrated by Oswald Spencer. The goal was to create a new master race, superior humans selected from children around the world and subjected to rigorous testing, enhancement, and surveillance. Most of them died. 2 survived. Albert thrived. After learning the truth, Wesker murders Spencer, not because he's horrified by the implications of Project W, but because he's insulted. He wasn't a prodigy, he wasn't chosen, he was one of many, a lab rat. So he takes over the project. Where Spencer failed to create gods, Wesker vows to become one. Ouroboros is the final form of a twisted dream. In Wesker's hands, it's both bioweapon and crucible. He's going to launch missiles across the world and achieve complete global saturation. Wesker's delusion is just the endpoint of a worldview that Umbrella always held. His god complex is legendary, but like all delusions of grandeur, it's rooted in insecurity. He was never chosen. He was bred, groomed, and observed. Raised by a system that saw him as a variable in an equation, not a person. His eventual betrayal of Spencer isn't a rejection of ideology, it's a rejection of being ordinary. Wesker doesn't destroy the House of Umbrella. He moves in, repaints the walls, and starts running his own experiments. His belief in genetic purity isn't born from scientific understanding, it's born from rage. He was told he was special, then he found out he wasn't. Now he needs to prove himself, and he's relying on faulty signs to do so. Even Excella is ultimately discarded. She thinks she's his equal. He sees her as raw material. She will soon be infected and will transform into a howling Ouroboros creature, no more significant than the soldiers we've been mowing down. In theory, Ouroboros grants immense strength, agility, and power, but it violently rejects her. By injecting her, Wesker's actions reveal his true belief. Superiority is not earned, it's inherent. You're either born worthy or you're not. But here's the kicker. Here's the thing that makes Wesker's plan dumb. We never see Ouroboros work.
Your future hinges upon this fight.
Not once in the game do we see a successful example of human evolution. No angel ascends. No ideal being walks from the flames. We learn that the Endopia tribe had kings who would live longer and become stronger, but A, that wasn't Ouroboros, that was the Sonnentrep flower, and B, just like that flower, there's no evidence that it was based on some particular genetic trait. The environment of Kajuju let the flower grow. In the debate of nature versus nurture, Resident Evil seems to make the case that nurture is what's important. When Wesker administered Ouroboros, he got only sludge, tentacles, and failure. His entire philosophy hinges on an unproven assumption, which makes him the perfect stand-in for eugenics. To try and dampen how extreme it is as a philosophy, nowadays you'll hear covert eugenicists talk about IQ. William Shockley proposed in 1970 that we sterilize anyone who scored less than 100 on an IQ test. Eugenicists claim that we should try to breed a race of superhumans with high IQs, something that is already weird and freaky to say for two reasons. The first is that Alfred Binet, the creator of the IQ test, has gone on the record saying it's not a perfect measure of intelligence. The second is that even if we were to take IQ as a serious metric, actual genetic scientists have claimed for decades that IQ isn't just a result of your genes. Your environment has a humongous impact as well. It's never scientific, it's always ideological, a fantasy projected by the powerful to justify atrocity. To go back to William Shockley, he estimated that a sterilization program would include 85% of all black people. Alright Monty, I get it, Wesker's a eugenicist, but it's not that deep. Hey look, I agree, I'm not going to turn around and tell you Resident Evil 5 should be transcribed into a textbook, but I am going to claim that it is accidentally genius. Eugenics is a dumb pseudoscience, fueled by ego, that makes no sense and relies on leaping logic. Albert Wesker has a dumb plan fueled by ego that makes no sense and relies on leaping logic. Because Resi doesn't explain his plan thoroughly enough. Because it doesn't explain how a man as calculated as this would want to rule over 6 billion tentacle monsters. Because we never see any evidence that it would even work, Albert Wesker becomes the perfect representative of that ideology. Wesker's arrogance is his weakness. Instead of killing Chris and Sheva himself, he leaves them in the hands of brainwashed Jill Valentine, who, to Wesker, is both proof and product of his philosophy, despite being a counter to it. Jill is the source code for Ouroboros, not because her genetic makeup, but because of the unique sequence of events that changed her biology. Slow exposure to the T-virus in the Spencer mansion, later infected with a special strain of the T-virus by Nemesis. Cured by one of the last remaining antidotes in the world. Her body then went through enormous trauma by smashing off the cliffs around Spencer's castle. She was kept in a cryogenic chamber and experimented on. After all of those mistakes, all of that battering, her body developed unique antibodies. The key to Ouroboros. She's paler now, her hair is platinum blonde. A file notes this as a pigmentation abnormality, something that is honestly a weird and unnecessary explanation. I personally prefer the headcanon that Wesker just bleached her to turn her into the image of his perfection, a world of blonde, pale people just like him. Her boss fight is a rescue. Wesker enslaved her with a chemical compound called P30. It keeps her controlled for short bursts, but it also quickly wears off, so the device in her chest constantly injects her with it. If we shoot too much, she dies. If we don't act fast enough, she pummels us to death. The solution is careful and precise, dodging, stunning, and pleading. Pulling the device off her chest, even as she claws at us, forces us to reckon with the brutality of the whole thing. What Wesker does to Jill makes her Resident Evil's greatest victim.
I couldn't control my actions, but God, I was still aware. Forgive me.
Weak but free from Wesker's control, Jill tells Chris and Sheva to go on without her. Saving her has changed Chris's outlook, dashed his pessimism in favor of hope. He wants to stay with her, but in the end, he trusts his partners, trusts in Jill to tell him the right thing to do, trusts in Sheva to get him where he needs to go. So, let's follow Wesker. Hey, welcome to Monty's Bar. Table for one? Ah, a hot date? Well, you're in luck. We got a cozy booth in the corner and weird drinks spilling off the menu. What's your poison? An espresso martini? Buddy, it's 9 PM, I've just cleaned the coffee machine and that is the devil's drink. Sure you don't want something else? Fine, but it's gonna take a minute, so while you wait, let me tell you about the wild cocktail of monsters in Resident Evil 5. Haha, you don't have a choice. Resi 5 is the most disparate game in the series when it comes to monster designs. 1. Mashed zombies with the natural world. 2. Especially with the remake, pulled from John Carpenter's The Thing to show how creepy the G-Virus was. 3. Wrapped up its predecessors in a Nemesis-shaped package. And 4. Emphasized insects to differentiate itself and link to the focus on parasites with Las Plagas. 5. Takes all of that, mashes it up with a muddler, and shakes. What does throwing humanoid monsters into a political hotspot do to the horror? I would argue that threading Resident Evil's creatures with the word terrorism ultimately makes them banal. This isn't an insane crisis for Chris to overcome, it's a mission to complete, just another day on the job. Interestingly, the Magini are characterized as less brain-dead than the Ganados from Resident Evil 4. They're more articulate, more trained. This is mainly shown through the weaponry they wield, but also in their behavior. For example, at the start of the game, we see a Magini wielding a megaphone. He rants in Swahili before ordering the execution of Reynard Fisher, and then actively orders the group to attack Chris and Sheva. Contrast this with how the Ganados ritualistically burn a cop at the stake in Leon's adventure. The behavior in 5 is less glazed and more active. The name Magini comes from the Swahili for evil spirits, something that makes the people of Kajuju seem superstitious. That makes sense considering they live so close and are descendants of a community that once worshipped the Sonnentrep. Legendary tales have been passed down. It's just a shame that's only shown to us through dead animals, generic skulls, and candles. Their intelligence could be blamed on the plaga they're infected with. The Ganados consumed a Type 1 plaga. Magini have been force-fed Type 2. It's an enhanced, engineered version of Las Plagas that takes control of the host far quicker, mainly because it's left to mature outside of the body before it's rammed down its victim's throat. Between the Magini and the Indapaya, we're given a swathe of foes to fight, but it typically goes back to an intelligent use of weapons. Even the Indapaya who've been infected with Type 3 plaga wield shields and spears, or wear helmets that incentivize headshots. Humanoid enemies were interesting in Resident Evil 4 because they were such a stark contrast to what we'd seen before. It made things unsettling and eerie, especially when their heads exploded and we saw the tentacles underneath. Bringing them into Resident Evil 5 is dampened because they keep returning to well-armed, well-stocked humans with guns. Although, if we look up, we might see a different slant on that. There are 4 special kinds of Magini, 2 of which are copied over from Resident Evil 4. The Chainsaw Maniac returns, as does the minigun-toting militiaman, but the intriguing stuff comes from the Executioner and the Giant Magini. While I don't love the Indapaya as a faction, when the Giant Magini enters the fray, he keeps things tense. A huge elephant mask covers their face and they wield clubs sewn with human skulls attached. However, he pales in comparison to the Executioner. This berserker rocks, and he stands out because he's used so sparingly. In fact, he has just one appearance in the main game, in the ambush of the first chapter. The DLC Desperate Escape, where we play as Jill and Josh as they fight to a chopper, suddenly throws legions of them at us that takes away from how ominous he is. But that DLC is basically 20 minutes of recycled assets that you can ignore, so let's do that. Spikes stick out of his flesh, massive needles that are left over from the deranged experiments his fellow Magini did to him. He's not just big because of a reaction to the plaga, he was pumped full of growth hormones to enhance his size. He brings the fear and a weird fantasy aesthetic to Resi 5 that ought to have been capitalized on more broadly. The Ajuli are dogs. You've seen dogs before, they've appeared in every Resident Evil game up to this point. Unlike the Colmillos in Spain, their bodies haven't been mutated and transformed by the plaga. Just like the Magini, they've been infected with Type 2, so they can hide their mutation. There's no wide, jagged smile. Instead, their entire face opens up like a fanged clamp. The first time they rush us and burst into their plaga-ridden self, it's terrifying. A burst of panic among the shooting, and that holds true for our other parasitic enemies. Duvalia appear inexplicably, both when it comes to lore and mechanics. Their name comes from a species of flower, lending to the huge leathery bulb that sits in the middle of their design. What first looks like a common Magini will mutate, with their top half exploding and sharp, fanged petals erupting from their stomach. It's a result of the Type 3 Plagas, and their arrival is often as unwelcome as it is unexpected. As Chris and Sheva follow Excella and Wesker to an aircraft carrier, they're lost in a legion of shipping containers, and shipping containers. We're in the endgame now, baby. Can you smell that rising action? Don't leave, I'll get you a drink in a minute. We previously saw Duvalia among the Endopia tribe, something that's explained by Tricell's ongoing experiments on the indigenous population. Why are they here on the aircraft carrier? Nobody knows, but the honest answer is that without them, this would go full military shooter. The parasite manifests in two other ways. Cephalo is a reskin of the Guadana from Resident Evil 4. They're writhing, spiked tentacles that burst out of some Magini's heads. Capipio are flying variants. Where the other Plaga we battle still rely on their human hosts to move and attack, the Capipio claw out of dead bodies and take to the skies. They fly on great fleshy wings, making them particularly dangerous compared to every other monster that we fight. The creatures in Resident Evil 5 rampage, the Capipio strategize. That's mainly because they were specifically bioengineered by Tricell to sell on the weapons market. Because we're in Africa, flash grenades don't work as well as they did in Spain. Under a different environment, the Type 2 and Type 3 Plaga have mutated to not be bothered by Kajuju's intense sunlight. With one exception. The Bui Kichwa is to Africa what Orana was to Spain. Light does kill them because they've spent so much time in the darkness of the underground temple. It seems they were part of Tricell's experiments, so haven't made it out into broader Kajuju. They scuttle around in the sand in their dozens, a nuisance more than a threat, a grown version of the Type 2 Plaga without a host. And speaking of experiments...
Freeze! What's going on here? Nothing that concerns either of you. We're not giving you an option. Now spit it out.
Deep in the ship, we find a lab full of Sonentrep. And Excella. It seems Wesker isn't just content with launching missiles full of Ouroboros. He plans to continue his wild experiments in his new world. Excella grabs a briefcase full of a strange chemical, PG-67AW. Something for Albert Wesker? In her desperation to get away, she drops a vial. Better take that for safekeeping. Because Tricell took over Umbrella's research during the collapse, they were able to breed a new batch of liquors and tried to improve them. Turns out, they didn't need to do that. A journal by one of the Tricell researchers reads,
BOWs like liquors are just a pain in the ass. If I said liquors were too perfect, I'd probably be going too far in my praise. But they're pretty much an evolutionary dead end. There's no room left for improvement. BOWs that were created using the T-virus don't seem to show much improvement when the progenitor virus is administered. But that's all we've got so far. They're still as blind as an old lady, and they're ugly as shit. The biggest jump in their evolution seems to be their ability to reproduce.
It's strange that Tricell don't think the liquors can be improved because, as bioweapons, there is one particular area that could be fixed. The fleshy weak spot on top of their head where brain pokes through. In practice, that weak spot doesn't matter. These beta versions are larger than their predecessors, but just as fast. You might be able to see their brain, but good luck hitting it when they're so agile. The puddles of blood, bone, and viscera tell us that their infamous appetites remained intact. Liquors always had insane metabolisms, something that explains the stinking shit piles in the loft of the second game's remake. The additional detail that they're breeding like rabbits is there so we can fight dozens of them. The liquors are cool, and considering the fact they're my favorite Resident Evil monster, I am always happy to see them return. But they are less cool when you need to gun down 20 of them in a oneer. It takes the sting out of their tense, sharp design. The Reaper is Resi 4's Novistador, except they can't camouflage themselves. Instead, they expunge a strange gas that cloaks them and gives us double vision. Automatic weaponry slams that, because you can spray, pray, and eventually the soft glowing underbelly will burst. They're an accident, something that makes their appearance quite comical in the grand scheme of things because they're the most threatening monster in the game. Cockroaches got exposed to Ouroboros while it was loaded into the bottom of the aircraft carrier. They're positioned the same way the Regenerators once were, a tense, monstrous creature that can quickly regenerate and brings the fear amidst a backdrop of explosions, shipping containers, and dull, rusting cargo areas. The setting unfortunately spoils that. Where the Regenerators were introduced in a claustrophobic lab that felt very different to the blasting that surrounded it, the Reapers are just chucked in as a new enemy type to think about while you take cover and unload your AK-47. All of that unloading brings us closer to Excella, but when Chris and Sheva make it topside, they're too late. Wesker's injected her with Ouroboros. She's become something more than human.
What's going on?
Why? When I've done so much.
It's poetic what happens to her. As she slowly degrades, losing her mind and warped by the black tentacles, she merges with the discarded bodies of the test subjects she once supplied to Wesker. Mechanically, it's not a bad boss. She's so large that she threatens to capsize the ship. Regular weapons won't cut it, so we grab a satellite launcher and use a big laser in the sky to blast at her. A powerful tri-cell weapon used to kill one of its directors. Buoy Kichwa will rattle around the tight deck, so you need to find time and space to get a shot in. If your partner covers you, you'll be fine. Sheva will not cover you. Excella's design encapsulates Ouroboros as a force in this game. Mechanically interesting because the game sets up gimmicks to consider. The furnace, the flamethrower, the satellite. But visually, it's an incongruous, bloated, dull mess. As an entity, what does Ouroboros tell us about Wesker's plan for the perfect race? The T-virus linked to Umbrella's search for immortality because it made zombies that were nigh unkillable. Las Plagas took real-world parasitic biology and spun it through a fantasy web, so making its monsters return to insects as a theme strengthened its presence. Ouroboros are writhing, squirming tentacles. It's a vacuous creature without much of a visual identity or potential to grow into something interesting. We fight 3 of them in Resident Evil 5, and aesthetically they boil down to tentacles, tentacles again, and big tentacles. Despite being the ultimate cocktail of Resident Evil science, it ends up being the least interesting. Alright, another boss down and 1 espresso martini. You're welcome. Oh, I think your date's here. Weird. Why is he wearing sunglasses? It's dark out. Despite not caring for it as a means of infection or a monster design, I think the name of Ouroboros is excellent. A snake eating its own tail. Wesker's plan is to destroy to create, upending the eternal cycle of life on the planet. This all links to the many meanings of the symbol. But let's go all the way back to its first appearance, past the Greeks, past the Vikings, all the way to the Egyptians in 13 BC. In the shrine of Tutankhamun, we see it, carved into gold. According to the Egyptologist Jan Assmann,
the symbol refers to the mystery of cyclical time, which flows back into itself.
Time flowing back in on itself, events coming full circle. That's where you find the heart of Resident Evil 5.
Wesker's superhuman strength. It comes from a virus, but the virus is unstable. In order to maintain a balance, he must inject himself regularly with a serum.
Jill Valentine and Chris Redfield working together to fight back Albert Wesker. Sheva fills the role of Rebecca or Barry, take your pick. It's a shame that the medic and the weapons specialist aren't here for the grand finale, and it's also a shame that Jill gets sidelined for the main confrontation. But her presence still marks that feeling of the past returning for a glorious climax. She is the key. She tells us that Wesker's strength is slowly waning. To stay as powerful as he needs to be, he needs to keep topping up with a serum. Now, if we can find that serum and use it on him, it should overload his system like a poison. Good thing Excella dropped some earlier, eh? Time to kill Wesker. Oh, wait. First. Here's some cover-based shooting and some turrets. When we finally confront him for round 2, he rants and monologues about separating the wheat from the chaff and overpopulation. Just a couple of the many dog whistles eugenicists use. The fact that God King Wesker needs to keep popping pills and jabbing needles into his arm further exposes him as a hypocrite and paints eugenics as nonsense built on a fragile ego. As far as Resident Evil 5 is concerned, he was the only example of someone who achieved the Ubermensch status that Spencer dreamed of. Chris is jacked, but he's not a bioweapon. Jill's strong, but she doesn't have superhuman abilities. Alex Wesker is referenced, but her position in the series was throwaway back in 2009. The only way Wesker can retain his power is through daily medication. not quite the best representative of a superior race. Because he's so quick, defeating him forces Chris and Sheva to shoot out the lights in a hangar and then use the darkness to blast a rocket launcher at him. It neatly plays with the launcher's position in the franchise. It's the go-to weapon for a final boss. The road to it is typically paved with horror and tension, so it brings the catharsis of ending a Resident Evil baddie once and for all. But here, the rocket launcher does not end Wesker once and for all. It just stuns him long enough for us to pump him with more chemicals.
In less than 5 minutes, we'll reach the optimal altitude for missile deployment. Ouroboros will be released into the atmosphere, ensuring complete global saturation.
In the name of throwbacks, we see that Wesker kept his samurai edge all these years. His star's weapon, a reminder of the good old days when he operated from the shadows. Robert Kendo would be proud. The fact numerous viruses are rattling around inside Wesker makes him the personification of how Resident Evil 5 approaches its ending. A note from a Tricell employee tells us that they've procured samples of the T virus, the G virus, the T Veronica virus, and Las Plagas. Slowly, over the course of the series, Wesker's been showing up to nab samples of every bioweapon we fought against. They're here in Kajuju. The T virus comes with the liquors. Las Plagas comes with everything else. Hell, the Type 2 Plaga was created by experimenting with leeches, a lovely nod to Resident Evil 0. I think to really pull it off, we needed more variety behind our monsters. Resident Evil 5's determination to be Resident Evil 4 in Africa means we don't get to face zombies or G-adults. It's mainly concerned with the parasite. We do get explanations about what Tricell did. Using the progenitor virus, they were able to harness Las Plagas and overcome the mental atrophy and extreme mutations found in T, G, and Veronica. But the T Veronica virus specifically is sadly absent. We can't trace any of our monsters back to it. Just one of the many ways Capcom frustratingly discards that game. G is also absent, despite the art book showing a train sequence that would hark back to it. The argument could be made that Wesker is G's representative because in certain versions of the canon, he was injected with it. But that's all spoiled by Wesker's murky retconned history. For all intents and purposes, the G virus is not in Resident Evil 5.
I should have killed you years ago. Chris.
How do you make sure in a series of monsters that always come back that you make a death feel final? A volcano. A goddamn volcano. Reeling from the serum that we've injected him with, Wesker boards his plane and sets it to autopilot. If we don't stop it, it's going to spread Ouroboros everywhere. Chris and Sheva battle him in the cargo bay and the fight knocks the plane off course. Wesker falls out the back, Sheva falls with him. We once again blast to the past as Chris leaps to save her, remembering how Jill sacrificed herself to save him. This time, it's different. He saves Sheva from the fall, but the plane crashes anyway into a frothing, diabolical volcano. Wesker's plan explodes with the plane. It's not about world domination anymore, it's not about complete global saturation. This boils down to good old-fashioned revenge against the man that's hounded him for years. To give him the edge, he injects himself with Ouroboros, and the tentacles mesh with parts of the plane. The setting makes the fight more epic than it is. Resident Evil 5 is built around a co-op showdown where both Chris and Sheva have moments where they need to slam QuickTime events to get through the battle in one piece. Sheva has to agonizingly clamber up a cliff as Wesker chases her. Chris has to punch a boulder. In 2025, not much can be said about the boulder punch that hasn't already been beaten to death. What I will say is that it's the sort of wacky extravagance that I'd expect in Resident Evil 4, but I don't mind bleeding into Resident Evil 5. This is the Big Bang showdown between Chris Redfield and Albert Wesker in the heart of a volcano. Chris's desperation to keep his partner alive, his sheer force of will, his need to stop Albert Wesker once and for all is hammered into every crack of knuckles on volcanic rock. It'd be weird if we weren't punching boulders if you think about it. The battle itself is tight and claustrophobic. Wesker's thrashing tentacles will kill you in one hit if you get too close. It all comes down to QuickTime events, shooting the weak point, and more QuickTime events. The spectacle is stunning, but the fight itself is underwhelming. And that's Resident Evil 5 in a nutshell. But at least it has the sense to reward us with a quippy, explosive callback. How do you make sure, in a series of monsters that always come back, that you make a death feel final? Turns out that the volcano is just set up. 2 rocket launchers are the punchline. It's classic Resi. The monster's down but not out. A chopper flies in, piloted by allies. A dumb line is delivered with a screeching blast as its percussion.
Suck on this, Wesker.
Your time's up, you son of a bitch.
For a game so obsessed with Resident Evil's past, its characters, its villains, its viruses, Resident Evil 5 is terrified of what made the series work. Capcom believed in a future without fear. They believed that the series had grown up, that the future of Resident Evil was adrenaline. It gestures at its heritage but rarely embraces it. There are emblems, there are hints of puzzles and keys and crests, but they're gutted, repurposed, and shoved into a corridor between turret sections. The game is always more interested in the next explosion than the next mystery. It takes the rhythm of Resident Evil and replaces the rests with machine gun fire. Kajuju as a setting should have felt mysterious, even mystical, but it's just grey apartments and beige deserts, an oil field stitched to a marsh stitched to an aircraft carrier. It's not a haunted city like REQUIEM, not an isolated castle like Salazar's Keep, not a lonely police station with its lights cut and its horrors hidden in the dark. Kajuju is a vague, directionless smear of Africa through a Hollywood lens, tire fires, AK-47s, and predictable violence. It tries to feel real but ends up feeling incredibly dull. It's hard to be scared of a place that feels so dead. And so the horror when it comes is neutered. Resource management isn't tense, it's frustrating. You're either drowning in bullets or locked in an inventory shuffle because your AI partner stole your last green herb. Every decision in the game seems afraid you'll stop moving long enough to feel something. And yet, in a forgotten hallway tucked into the corner of the main menu, Lost in Nightmares is waiting. It's 1 hour long and 10 times more Resident Evil than the rest of the game. You explore a crumbling castle, you search desks, you listen to silence. You don't know what's coming next. Lost in Nightmares understands pacing, it understands restraint. It doesn't hand you a machine gun in the first 10 minutes or surround you with 10 allies on walkie-talkies. It builds its horror slowly, patiently, letting Spencer's madness speak through design. It's brooding, atmospheric, and creepy. It is frankly what Resident Evil 5 should have been. Wesker is the game's one unshakable triumph, a completely ridiculous and completely compelling villain. He struts through every cutscene like a man who's read and misunderstood Nietzsche. He's what happens when you let Resident Evil's camp become characterization. It works. That is why, for me, 5 is so frustrating, because underneath the action movie cosplay, there is potential. Lost in Nightmares proves the team hadn't forgotten how to scare us. Wesker proves they hadn't forgotten how to write a villain. The lore runs deep, the callbacks are constant, but everything is buried under loud, linear bombast. A game that looks like Resident Evil and screams like Resident Evil, but keeps dragging you into turret sections and military bunkers while saying, "Don't worry, backup's on the way." I used to love it for what it was, a good time with a friend, a decent shooter with resi paint. But the more I come back, the more I realize how much it gave up. How hard it tried to move forward by leaving the wrong parts behind. A future without fear? Sorry, Chris. I'm not sure that is something worth fighting for.
Chris Redfield, well, isn't this one happy family reunion? Some men drink gold, others dream women, but me, Chris, I dream of moments like this.
Do you feel it, the blood, as it's rushing to your head and you feel your world shred? Do you see it?